All right, little bird. You think you can hang with the eagles? Let's see you fly. Get in the circle. Don't worry, I'll go easy on you. A ripple of snickers went through the assembled soldiers, a wave of cheap amusement washing over the polished floor of the Fort Bragg Combatives training facility. The air, thick with the smell of sweat, rubber matting, and institutional discipline, seemed to magnify the insult, turning Sergeant First Class Gunner Davies's words into a public proclamation of judgment. He was a mountain of a man, all corded muscle and booming confidence, the kind of instructor whose reputation was built on volume as much as on victory. His voice echoed off the concrete block walls, a testament to his self-appointed authority over this domain. Before him, the subject of his derision stood in a silence so profound it was almost a physical presence. Specialist Anya Sharma was, by every superficial measure, unremarkable. She was of average height, with a wiry frame that seemed lost inside her loose-fitting ACUs. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, regulation bun, and her face, devoid of makeup or expression, was a canvas of calm neutrality. She didn't flinch. She didn't retort. She didn't even seem to register the laughter that lapped at her like a tide of disrespect. Her focus was elsewhere, on the subtle shift of her own weight, the feeling of the mat beneath her boots, the rhythmic, controlled pattern of her own breath. This stillness, this absolute refusal to engage with the theater of arrogance playing out before her, was a language few in the room understood. It was a language of patience, of discipline forged in crucibles they couldn't imagine. But from the observation deck, a glassed-in perch overlooking the training floor, Colonel Jackson Reed leaned forward, a flicker of recognition in his tired, perceptive eyes. He wasn't looking at her size or her rank. He was looking at the way she balanced on the balls of her feet, a posture of perfect potential energy, a living embodiment of coiled readiness. He saw something the others missed, a ghost of a different world in her unnerving calm. It was the quiet of the hurricane's eye, a profound peace that precedes overwhelming force. The colonel had seen that stillness before, in places where mistakes were measured in blood, not bruised egos. He watched as Davies preened for his audience, rolling his thick shoulders and cracking his knuckles like a B-movie villain, completely oblivious to the nature of the storm he was so determined to provoke. The young soldiers saw a joke, a bit of harmless hazing. Colonel Reed saw a masterclass in professional discipline, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him slightly, that a lesson was about to be taught. It would not be loud, it would not be flashy, but it would be permanent. If you believe that true strength is found in quiet competence, type respect in the comments below. The Sergeant First Class continued his performance, mistaking Sharma's silence for fear, her calm for weakness. It was a fundamental error in threat assessment, a failure of imagination born from a career spent equating noise with power. "What's the matter, Specialist? Cat got your tongue?" he taunted, circling her like a predator sizing up prey. "Don't worry, this is just a demonstration. We need to show these new recruits what happens when you don't have proper aggression. We need to show them how to project force." He punctuated the statement by slamming a fist into his open palm, a crack of sound that made several of the younger soldiers jump. The crowd's nervous laughter grew louder, a chorus of complicity that further isolated the lone figure in the center of the mat. They were all part of the system, a system that often rewarded the loudest voice in the room, and Davies was a virtuoso of volume. He saw a small woman from a support MOS, probably a paper pusher or a supply clerk, someone who had wandered into his world by mistake. His prejudice was a thick, impenetrable wall, built brick by brick from years of unchallenged assumptions. He saw her gender, her rank, her quiet demeanor, and he constructed an entire narrative of incompetence around her. He could not conceive of a reality where his physical advantages, nearly 100 pounds of muscle and a significant height and reach disparity, would mean anything less than total, immediate dominance. While he spoke, Sharma began a series of small, almost imperceptible movements. She rotated her wrists slowly, feeling the delicate articulation of each joint. She bent her knees slightly, testing the grip of her boots on the mat. She rolled her neck from side to side, a methodical gesture of preparation that was utterly devoid of theatrics. Every action was efficient, precise, and internal. Where Davies's warm-up was a public spectacle designed to intimidate, Hers was a private ritual of centering, of drawing her focus inward until the noise of the room, the insults, the laughter, all faded into an irrelevant hum. She was not preparing to fight a man. She was preparing to solve a problem. The problem was one of physics and momentum, of leverage and anatomy. The man himself, with his ego and his taunts, was just the housing for the problem. The colonel watched this silent preparation from above, his conviction hardening. He recognized the economy of her motion, the hallmark of someone who has drilled a set of movements not hundreds, but tens of thousands of times, until they are as natural and unconscious as breathing. He saw the way her eyes remained fixed on Davies's center of mass, ignoring the distracting feints of his hands and the aggressive posturing. She wasn't looking at the fighter. She was looking at the machine, analyzing its mechanics, identifying its flaws. The lesson was coming. The bell was about to ring, not for a match, but for an education. The signal was given, a sharp, perfunctory nod from the assistant instructor, and the demonstration began. Davies lunged forward with the explosive force of a freight train, a guttural roar tearing from his throat. It was a classic shock and awe tactic, designed to overwhelm and panic an opponent before the fight truly began. His right hand, balled into a fist the size of a small ham, shot out in a powerful jab aimed at her face. For the onlookers, it seemed an impossible attack to counter. The sheer speed and power behind it were overwhelming. But for Sharma, it was simply the first variable in a complex equation. She didn't retreat. She didn't flinch. Instead, she moved in a way that defied their expectations. With a subtle, almost liquid shift of her hips, she moved just enough to her left so the punch slid past her ear, its displaced air rustling the fine hairs on her temple. At the same moment, her right hand came up, not to block, but to guide. Her open palm made gentle contact with his extended forearm, not stopping its momentum but redirecting it, turning his own power against him and pulling him slightly off balance. It was a movement of such sublime efficiency that most of the recruits missed it entirely. All they saw was that Davies's first, thunderous attack had somehow missed. He grunted in frustration, recovering his balance and immediately launching into a furious combination, a left hook followed by a right cross, then a powerful leg kick. It was a relentless assault, a storm of kinetic energy. Yet, it found no purchase. Sharma became a study in absorption. She was not a rock resisting a wave. She was the water itself, yielding, flowing, and redirecting. Her feet barely seemed to move, but her body was in constant, fluid motion. She parried, she slipped, she weaved. Each of Davies's attacks was met not with a hard, bone-jarring block, but with a soft touch that subtly altered its trajectory, causing his fists to meet empty air and his kicks to sweep harmlessly past. The sounds of the fight were telling. From Davies, there were grunts of exertion, the heavy slap of his boots on the mat, the frustrated hiss of his breath. From Sharma, there was only silence. Her breathing remained even, her expression placid. The initial snickers from the crowd had long since died, replaced by a confused, tense quiet. They had come expecting a comedy. They were witnessing a mystery. They could not comprehend what they were seeing. Davies's frustration began to curdle into genuine anger. His technique grew sloppy, his movements more telegraphed. He was fighting her silence, her infuriating calm. He was throwing everything he had at a ghost, and the exertion was beginning to show in the sheen of sweat on his brow and the heaving of his chest. He was being dismantled, not by force, but by a profound and unnerving competence that operated on a level he had never encountered. He was the storm, and she was the unshakable calm at its center, waiting patiently for the inevitable moment when the storm would exhaust itself. The breaking point arrived, as it always does, when ego finally overpowered discipline. Fueled by a potent cocktail of public humiliation and raw fury, Sergeant First Class Davies abandoned the last vestiges of his training. He bellowed, a primal scream of pure rage, and charged forward, lowering his head for a powerful, desperate tackle. He intended to use his immense weight advantage to simply crush her, to drive her into the mat, and end this baffling spectacle through sheer brute force. It was a foolish, telegraphed move, the last resort of a man who had been systematically stripped of all other options. For Sharma, this was not a threat, it was an invitation. It was the precise opening her patient defense had been designed to create. As the 240-pound man barreled towards her, she did not brace for impact. She did not retreat. In the final fraction of a second, she took a single, deliberate step forward and to the side, pivoting on the ball of her left foot. His charging momentum, now unchecked and undirected, carried him past her. In that fleeting moment of his imbalance, her hands moved with a speed that seemed to blur. Her left hand cupped his charging right elbow, while her right hand slid over the top of his shoulder, her fingers finding a precise grip on his triceps. It was no longer a fight. It was an exercise in applied physics. Using his own forward momentum as the primary engine of the technique, she dropped her center of gravity and turned her hips, a seamless, spiraling motion that transformed his linear charge into a devastating rotational fall. He was no longer a man, but a weight, a collection of levers and joints that she was manipulating with an expert's touch. He was airborne for a split second, a look of utter bewilderment on his face, before he crashed onto the mat with a sickening thud that echoed through the cavernous gym. But the technique wasn't finished. As he landed, she maintained her grip, sinking with him and applying pressure to the captured arm, extending the shoulder joint just beyond its natural range of motion. There was a distinct, wet pop, a sound of cartilage and ligament giving way that was hideously loud in the sudden, absolute silence of the room. A sharp, agonized cry was torn from Davies's throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated pain that replaced his earlier roar of aggression. He lay on the mat, clutching his shoulder, his face a mask of agony, shock, and a dawning, terrible understanding. The demonstration was over. Silence, thick and heavy, descended upon the room. The only sound was Davies's ragged, pained breathing. The crowd of soldiers stood frozen, their faces a gallery of stunned disbelief. The joke had ended, and the punchline was a dislocated shoulder and a shattered monument of arrogance. Into this tableau of stunned silence and dawning realization, a new presence made itself known. The door to the observation deck clicked open, and the sound of measured footsteps on the steel staircase cut through the tension. Every head turned to see Colonel Jackson Reed descending to the training floor. His face was grim, his eyes sweeping over the scene with an air of absolute command that instantly recalibrated the atmosphere in the room. The lingering traces of amusement in the soldiers' expressions evaporated, replaced by a rigid, formal attention. The colonel's presence was a clear signal that this was no longer a simple training incident. It was something more significant. He moved with a purpose that was both calm and intimidating. He paid no mind to the medics who were now rushing towards the groaning sergeant on the mat. He did not look at the pale-faced assistant instructor who stood frozen, unsure of what to do. His path was direct, his focus singular. He walked straight to Specialist Anya Sharma, who stood calmly by, her breathing still even, her posture relaxed but ready. She had not moved to gloat, nor had she moved to offer aid. She simply stood, a silent observer of the consequences of her own precise actions. The colonel stopped a respectful distance from her, his gaze intense. The room held its collective breath. They expected a reprimand, a dressing down for injuring a senior NCO. Instead, the colonel's voice, when it came, was quiet, devoid of anger, and filled with a kind of professional curiosity. Sambo-style rotating arm lock, transitioning from a charge counter, he said, his words a statement, not a question. Textbook execution. But the entry, the way you guided his initial punch to create the opening, that wasn't Sambo. That was Systema. Who was your instructor? His question was a key, designed for a very specific lock. It was a shibboleth, a piece of esoteric knowledge that bypassed rank and superficial appearances, speaking directly from one professional to another. It was a test. Sharma's eyes met his for the first time, and for a fleeting moment, the mask of neutrality lifted, revealing a flicker of mutual, professional respect. Colonel Mikhail Ryabko, sir, she replied. Her voice was quiet but clear, her answer precise and immediate. The name hung in the air, meaningless to the recruits, but for Colonel Reed, it was a thunderclap. It was the name of a living legend in the world of close-quarters combat, one of the founders of the Russian martial art he had just identified, a man who only trained the most elite operators in the world. The colonel's expression hardened, not with anger, but with a cold certainty. The mystery was beginning to unravel, and he knew the answer would be far more extraordinary than anyone in this room could possibly comprehend. The colonel's gaze shifted from Sharma to the terrified-looking NCO, cowering by the control station for the room's large display monitors. "Sergeant," he commanded, his voice now laced with steel, "put Specialist Sharma's personnel file on the main screen. All of it. Unredact the classified sections. Authorization code read Alpha 79er." The sergeant fumbled with the keyboard, his fingers shaking as he typed in the command override. A moment later, the massive screen at the front of the gym, usually reserved for training videos and announcements, flickered to life. Anya Sharma's official army photo appeared, the same neutral expression staring out at the assembled soldiers. And then, the data began to populate the screen, line by line, each a hammer blow against the foundation of their ignorant assumptions. The silence in the room deepened, becoming a vessel for their collective shock. Her unit was listed not as some rear echelon support company, but as a designation most of them had only ever heard of in whispers and rumors. Regimental Reconnaissance Company, 75th Ranger Regiment. Below that, a list of attached assignments that read like a directory of the most elite units in the United States military. A collective gasp rippled through the soldiers. Then came the skill identifiers, a long string of codes that painted a picture of a warrior of almost mythical capability. The list went on, each entry more unbelievable than the last. Anaphora of excellence, a litany of lethal competence. There was Master Parachutist with a combat star. There was Military Freefall Jump Master. There was Special Forces Advanced Urban Combat, SFAUC. Instructor Certified. There was SEER School, High Risk. Instructor. There was Systema Certified Expert. Level 4. There was Krav Maga Master Instructor. Gaiden Fighting Systems. The screen scrolled down, revealing a list of deployments, most of them simply reading classified. But the ones that were visible were a tour of the world's most dangerous places over the past decade. Her awards section was a constellation of valor. The Purple Heart, the Bronze Star with a V for valor, the Army Commendation Medal, not once, but 4 times, each with a V device. The screen was a testament, a silent, irrefutable rebuttal to every snide remark, every condescending laugh. It was the story of a life lived at the sharpest point of the spear, a story that had been hidden behind a quiet demeanor and a plain face. Colonel Reed allowed the information to hang in the air for a full minute, letting the weight of it crush the ignorance in the room. Then, he turned to face Sharma directly. In a move that sent a shockwave through the rigid military hierarchy of the room, he drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and executed a salute. It was not the casual gesture an officer gives a subordinate. It was a crisp, formal, deeply respectful salute, the kind reserved for Medal of Honor recipients or visiting generals. "My apologies for my NCO's unprofessionalism, Specialist," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "It will not happen again. Thank you for the lesson." The story of what happened in the combatives' gym spread through Fort Bragg like wildfire, fueled by the potent combination of a high-ranking NCO's public humiliation and the astonishing reveal of a hidden legend. It became the defining gossip of the week, morphing and growing with each retelling. In the barracks, young privates whispered the tale in hushed, reverent tones, the details already becoming mythic. They said Specialist Sharma hadn't even broken a sweat. They said Colonel Reed had known who she was the entire time and had set the whole thing up as a test. They said the sound of Davies's shoulder popping had been heard all the way in the post headquarters. The story was given a name, a tag that solidified its place in the base's informal folklore. The Sharma correction. It was a perfect, concise summary of the event, a quiet, professional adjustment made to a loud, broken system of prejudice. The security camera footage, a grainy but undeniable record of the entire encounter, was inevitably leaked. It circulated through encrypted chats and text messages, a viral sensation within the closed world of the military installation. Soldiers would huddle around phones, watching the silent, fluid movements of the unassuming Specialist as she systematically dismantled a man twice her size. They would rewind and replay the final takedown in slow motion, marveling at the brutal, balletic efficiency of it all. The video became an instructional tool, a visual sermon on the profound difference between perceived strength and actual competence. It was a stark reminder that the most dangerous person in the room is rarely the one making the most noise. The legend of Anya Sharma grew not because of anything she said or did after the incident, but because of her continued, unwavering silence. She deflected all questions, ignored all praise, and simply went back to her duties with the same quiet focus she had displayed in the center of that mat. Her refusal to participate in her own myth-making only made the myth more powerful. She became a symbol, a walking personification of the quiet professional ethos that the special operations community holds sacred. She didn't need to tell people who she was. Her actions had spoken for her with a clarity that no boast could ever achieve. She was living proof that respect is not something you demand, but something you command through undeniable, demonstrated excellence. The ripples of her actions spread outward, forcing a re-evaluation of assumptions in every corner of the base, a quiet correction that began with a single, perfectly executed technique. For Sergeant First Class Gunner Davies, the aftermath was a crucible of pain, both physical and psychological. His dislocated shoulder required surgery and months of grueling physical therapy, a constant, throbbing reminder of his catastrophic failure in judgment. Every painful stretch, every limited rotation was a penance for his arrogance. But the physical injury was a pale shadow of the damage done to his ego and his professional reputation. He had been the king of his small kingdom, the loud, confident gatekeeper of the combatives facility. Now, he was a cautionary tale, the punchline to a base-wide joke. He saw the way the younger soldiers looked at him, no longer with fear or respect, but with a mixture of pity and contempt. He heard the whispers when he walked into the mess hall. The shame was a heavier burden than any rucksack. But in the depths of this humiliation, something unexpected began to grow. Forced into a period of quiet inactivity, Davies had nothing to do but reflect. He watched the leaked video of the incident over and over, not with anger, but with the critical eye of a student. He saw his own sloppy, rage-fueled movements. He saw his telegraphed attacks. And he saw her impossible calm, her perfect balance, her sublime economy of motion. He finally understood that he hadn't been defeated by a person. He had been defeated by a philosophy, by a level of mastery he hadn't known existed. A month after his surgery, his arm still in a sling, he sought her out. He found her in the base library, reading a thick, technical manual on satellite communications. He approached her table, his usual bluster gone, replaced by a quiet, raw humility. "Specialist Sharma," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. I was wrong. What I said. There's no excuse." She looked up from her book, her expression unchanging. She simply waited. "That takedown," he continued, gesturing with his good arm. "I've been in the army for 18 years. I've never seen anything like it. The file. All that stuff they showed on the screen. It's real." She gave a single, small nod. "Yes, Sergeant." He took a deep breath, swallowing the last, bitter remnants of his pride. "I came to ask if you would be willing to teach me." This was his moment of transformation, the true lesson of the Sharma correction. It wasn't about his defeat, but about what he chose to do with it. Anya looked at him for a long moment, her gaze analytical. She wasn't seeing the arrogant instructor from the gym. She was seeing a soldier who had recognized his own deficiencies and was actively seeking to correct them. To her, that was the entire point of training. Her answer, when it came, was true to her character. "The first lesson," she said quietly, "is about breathing. Be at the gym at 0500 tomorrow." A symbolic artifact of the event was quietly created by the trainees. The faint scuff mark on the mat where Davies's head had hit became a landmark. Someone outlined it in white chalk, and next to it, wrote a single word: "Assume nothing." 2 years passed, and the institutional memory of Fort Bragg absorbed the story of the Sharma correction, transforming it from gossip into doctrine. The incident became a mandatory case study in the Combatives Instructor Certification course. New NCOs were required to watch the security footage, to analyze the fight, and to write an essay on the dangers of prejudice and the importance of accurate threat assessment. The legend of the quiet, unassuming specialist who had humbled a mountain of a man was now an official part of the curriculum, a permanent lesson etched into the training DNA of the installation. The chalk outline on the mat had long since been replaced by a small, brass plaques screwed into the floor, bearing the same inscription. Assume nothing, it was now a tradition for every graduating class of instructors to touch the plaque, a silent acknowledgement of the lesson it represented. The culture of the combatives facility had fundamentally shifted. The emphasis moved away from loud aggression and brute force towards technical precision, control, and the quiet confidence that comes from true mastery. The new generation of instructors spoke less and demonstrated more. They learned to look past the uniform, the rank, and the physical appearance of their students, searching instead for the subtle indicators of genuine skill. The change was palpable, a lasting legacy born from a single, 5-second encounter. Sergeant First Class Gunner Davies, now fully recovered, was a changed man. He was still an instructor, but his methods were unrecognizable from his former self. He was quieter, more patient, more perceptive. He became one of the program's most effective teachers, precisely because he used his own monumental failure as his primary teaching tool. He would often begin his first class by playing the video of his own defeat. "That man you see on the screen," he would tell the new students, his voice filled with a hard-won humility, "was a fool. He was strong, but he wasn't smart. He was loud, but he wasn't competent. He made the mistake of judging a warrior by her cover. Do not be that fool." And sometimes, standing in the shadows at the back of the gym, observing the new class, would be Sergeant Anya Sharma. She never spoke, never interrupted. She simply watched, her presence a silent, powerful reminder of the standard. Her legacy wasn't the plaque on the floor or the story in the lesson plan. It was in the improved competence of the soldiers around her, in the quiet professionalism she had instilled, not through words, but through a single, undeniable demonstration of excellence. It was a legacy of action, a testament to the enduring truth that what you are speaks so loudly, the world has no need to hear what you say. The truest measure of a legacy is not found in a story that is told, but in a standard that is upheld. The tale of Anya Sharma and Gunner Davies became more than just a piece of military folklore. It evolved into an operational principle. It was a living parable about the lethal nature of assumptions. In the unforgiving calculus of combat, assuming your opponent is weak because they are quiet, or small, or female, is not just an error in judgment. It is a potentially fatal flaw. The lesson that echoed from that gym was that competence is a quality of action, not appearance. True strength is not the ability to project force, but the discipline to control it. It is the calm in the heart of the storm, the quiet mind that sees the equation of violence and solves it with the most efficient, precise answer. This is the ethos of the quiet professional, a creed written not in manuals, but in the silent, disciplined execution of duty. It is a recognition that the most profound statements are often made without a single word. A perfectly executed technique, a steady hand under pressure, an unwavering calm in the face of chaos. These are the languages of mastery. Anya Sharma never sought to be a legend. She sought only to be competent, to be ready, to be an asset to her team and her mission. The legend was simply a byproduct of her unwavering commitment to that standard. Her story endures not as a monument to a single individual, but as a timeless reminder of a universal truth, that arrogance is a brittle shield, and that humility, when paired with relentless preparation, is an unbreakable sword. The ripples of her actions continue to spread, long after the event itself has faded into the past. Every instructor who tells the story, every soldier who touches the plaque, every leader who learns to look beyond the surface, becomes a part of that legacy. It is a legacy of quiet competence, a legacy of earned respect, a legacy that proves that sometimes the most powerful voice in the room is the one that says nothing at all, allowing skill to be its own irrefutable argument. It is a reminder that the character of a warrior is ultimately revealed not in the noise of their boasts, but in the deafening silence of their results. For more stories where precision triumphs over prejudice and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.